The world was shocked when Val Kilmer died, but fans were not ready for what they found out afterward. While Hollywood was sad about the death of one of its biggest stars, Val Kilmer's autopsy report came to light. There were troubling and shocking facts inside that made everyone wonder what really happened in his last days. This is not the story that you read in the news. Behind the accolades and movie montages, there was a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about Val Kilmer's last days. Wait for it, because what's in that story will blow your mind. Hollywood is sad about Val Kilmer's sudden death on April 1, 2025. People in Hollywood and all over the world were shocked by the news. Val Kilmer had died at the age of 65. He was a famous actor who was best known for his parts in Top Gun, Batman Forever, and The Door. According to the formal release, symptoms from pneumonia were the cause, but even though the story got a lot of attention on social media and friends paid their respects, something about it felt unfinished. Almost right away, the honors began to come in. Director Michael Mann, who worked with Kilmer on Heat, said that he was a bright, unpredictable force that changed every scene he was in. "See you, pal. I'm going to miss you. You were a brave, creative firecracker," Josh Brolin wrote in a letter. Several actors, directors, and singers shared their sadness over the death of Val Kilmer, who was loved by many. The official Top Gun account wrote, "A legend on and off screen. Val Kilmer, you'll be missed." A black and white picture of Kilmer as Doc Holliday in Tombstone was shared on Slash, and director Francis Ford Coppola said that Kilmer was a natural talent that grew stronger with age. The tones of all the messages were the same: shock, sadness, and a feeling that this loss happened too soon. Some messages were long, some were short. Still, there were whispers in the background of the flowers, comments, and media coverage. People had known for years that Val Kilmer was sick. He fought a long, public fight with throat cancer. After years of rumors and rejection, he finally told everyone about it in 2017. Fans saw him lose his voice, have trouble breathing, and fade away from public view, except for one last strong performance in Top Gun Maverick. But many people knew it was time for him to leave when he came back to the screen with the help of voice AI and creative shooting. Still, most people thought that the long-term damage from his cancer treatment was what killed him when they heard the news. Pneumonia in a body that was already weak wasn't a surprise. What happened next was what caught everyone by surprise. As Kilmer's death approached, tributes kept coming in and the media played endless highlight reels of his best parts. But behind closed doors, a different talk began. People close to him, old co-workers, and even family members began to say that they hadn't known how bad things were. Several people gave hints that Val Kilmer had been pulling away from people more and more in the months before he died, ignoring calls, turning down guests, and declining offers of help. Not long after, his friends began to wonder why no one had seen him in public for months. Why did people say that he had been to the hospital several times in the past year, but it never made the news? And why did it take so long to release his full autopsy report, even though pneumonia was the stated cause of death? It was easy for these questions to get lost in all the honors at first, but some writers kept working on them. There were rumors that the autopsy showed details that were very disturbing and not at all what anyone expected. There were hints that Kilmer's last days may have been even darker than everyone knew. But for now, everyone was sad. Fans watched their favorite Val Kilmer movies again, and old interviews, movie clips, and pictures of Kilmer happy in his prime were all over social media. Even though everyone was sad, there was a quiet feeling of anxiety. The news stories told how he died, but the real story, which was hidden in the small print of his final medical report, was still to be found. And when it came to the surface, everyone was shocked. Val Kilmer's rise to fame and mystery in Hollywood. Before the funeral, the honors, and the questions about what the autopsy showed, Val Kilmer was something else. He was a Hollywood force of nature, a man who could light up the screen and hide behind a character like few others. But he was also a man who was circled by gossip, trouble, and mystery long before he died. It was quick and easy to remember Val Kilmer's rise. He was born in Los Angeles in 1959 and grew up in California. He became interested in art at a young age. At the time, he was the youngest person to ever be accepted into Juilliard's prestigious acting school. Following that, it wasn't long before Hollywood called. His big break came in Top Secret, as a comedy in 1984 that showed he could switch between being charming and crazy. But Top Gun, which came out in 1986, made him famous. Kilmer played the cool, cocky rival Tom "Iceman" Kazansky, who easily stole scenes from Tom Cruise. He became the heart of the story in some way. After that, his career took off. It was so easy for him to play parts like Jim Morrison in The Doors, which even Morrison's friends were shocked by, and Doc Holliday in Tombstone, where his performance as the Southern shooter became legendary. He played Batman in Batman Forever, which was one of the biggest hits of the 1990s. Even though that job came with its own problems, there were reports that Val Kilmer was hard to get along with as his fame grew. There were stories from movie sets going around. Directors said he was difficult to work with, unreliable, and even hostile. On the crazy set of The Island of Dr. Moreau, Kilmer got into so many fights with the cast and crew that one director quit. In Batman Forever, he was directed by Joel Schumacher, who called him psychologically troubled and said he was the hardest character he'd ever worked with. After these claims were made, Kilmer said he was wrongly accused because he was a perfectionist who wanted to get into his parts fully and wasn't afraid to say what he thought. But the damage to his image didn't go away. In the early 2000s, he stopped being as bankable and well-known, and he quietly pulled back from the center of Hollywood. But Kilmer had a charm about him that got people interested. Even when the news said he was moody, producers kept hiring him and fans kept watching. It seemed like there was a man battling with something much bigger than the parts he played behind the scenes. Then the sickness came. There were rumors around 2014 that Kilmer's health was getting worse, but he didn't say anything. No one talked about his obvious weight loss, his raspy voice, or the events he had to cancel in public. He claimed having cancer for years, even when friends and fans could see that something was wrong. Kilmer didn't finally say it again in 2017. He had been beating throat cancer, which he kept secret while he went through chemotherapy, radiation, and finally a tracheotomy that took away his voice. Fans liked how honest he was when he finally talked about it. When he came out in public again, weak but smiling, they praised his strength. They saw his return as Iceman in Top Gun Maverick as a win and a chance to make up for lost time. Anyway, Kilmer kept a lot of things from the world. The more you look back at his life, the more you saw this. Yes, she had many memorable parts, but there were also years of stress, silence, and secrets about what was really going on behind the scenes. And it wasn't just during his career. No one knew, not even his family and best friends, that he would always need to hide and protect his privacy. It wasn't just during his illness or career. It would stick with him until the end. And the most upsetting part of his story wouldn't be in the press or in interviews. It would be based on what was found after he died, the fight in private. Kilmer went to war with cancer in silence. For years, Val Kilmer's public life was like a highlight reel. He walked the red carpet, was in hit movies, and smiled in interviews. Kilmer was fighting a war behind the cameras in news that he wouldn't talk about. By the time the world found out about it, it had already cost him almost everything. It began in secret around 2014. His fans began to notice that he was different. He looked weaker and thinner. When he was in public, his voice sounded rough and hoarse. Events were canceled. He was said to be in the hospital, and pictures of him that looked weak were hazy. There were rumors that he was very sick, but every time the press asked, Kilmer denied it. He kept saying he was fine when it was clear he wasn't. The truth didn't come out until 2017. Kilmer told The Hollywood Reporter in an interview what many people already thought. He had been told that he had throat cancer. He had radiation, chemotherapy, and a tracheotomy over the past 3 years, which changed his ability to speak forever. In classic Kilmer style, he played it down by making fun of his weak voice and saying he was fine. But there was more to the story than that. They took away almost everything else, but they saved his life. His once strong voice, which you could hear in movies like The Doors and Tombstone, was now just a weak whisper. Because his health was weak, it was hard for him to breathe and eat. He was unable to work as he normally did. This was hell for a man who had spent decades in front of the camera. Kilmer didn't want sympathy, though. Instead, he tried to change the story. He put out a very personal documentary in 2021 called Val. It was made with the help of his children. Home videos from over the years were used, along with voiceovers, to tell his story, from his youth to his rise in Hollywood to his fight with cancer. It was real, honest, and sometimes hard to watch. People didn't see the polished star, but rather the weak man behind the fame. Val was a release for many fans and a chance to finally understand the man who had been hidden behind characters and news stories for so long. But even the documentary didn't show everything. Kilmer was open about his illness, but he kept some parts of his story to himself, parts that his friends, family, and even doctors would later say they didn't fully understand. The lead story said that he had won the battle against cancer. He was no longer sick and was living a quiet life in Los Angeles, focused on his art, his family, and small projects he worked on his own. But the people who knew him best knew that recovery didn't mean he was completely safe. Because of the tracheotomy, he was always at risk. It was hard for him to breathe, eat, and talk every day because his defense system was weak. Besides the physical damage, there were signs of something deeper: emotional, loneliness, withdrawal, and a rising unwillingness to let anyone into his world. People didn't remember the same Val Kilmer. Even though there were positive news stories about his comeback, his health kept getting worse in the background. Even the people who were closest to him agreed that he wasn't calling out to them anymore in his last few months. He wasn't in need of help. No one was able to see how bad things had become. When Kilmer beat cancer, everyone thought his fight was over. But what most people, including those close to him, didn't understand was that the battle had left him with scars that went much deeper than anyone knew. When those scars came back, they did so in the strangest and scariest ways. He was gone, and fans who grew up seeing Val Kilmer rule the big screen thought that his return in Top Gun Maverick was like a moment frozen in time. It was the year 2022, almost 40 years after the movie that made him famous. Again, he was there. Tom "Iceman" Kazansky stood next to Maverick, played by Tom Cruise. This time, though, there was something different and weak hidden beneath the cool surface. By the time Maverick came out, everyone knew that Kilmer's voice would never be the same. No longer was his fight with throat cancer a secret. A lot of people didn't know how hard it was to get him back on TV at all. It was made possible by the hard work of the directors, Cruise, and Kilmer himself. Kilmer's health was getting worse, and he was having trouble speaking. He had to work hard to do simple scenes, but he wanted to do them for himself as well as the people. It was a chance to finish a story about a figure who had been important to his career in many ways. A lot of different artistic methods were used by the artists to bring Iceman back to life. In the story, they used text messages a lot, and Iceman talked to people by typing. He only said a few simple words when he finally spoke. In spite of that, those few lines were important because they weren't just from Iceman. Kilmer said them himself. In that scene, what people heard wasn't just his real voice. It was a mix of his real words and cutting-edge AI voice technology. Kilmer had a software company make digital copies of his voice from old records. Everyone missed the voice, but it was enough to make everyone remember it. When the movie first came out, people were shocked. Fans all over the world were moved to tears, and reviewers said it was one of the most moving parts of the movie. It wasn't about the words, but what they stood for. A man who had lost everything coming back for one last bow. On the other hand, things were not as done off-screen. Later, the people who worked on the movie said it was really hard. The way Kilmer looked was not good. It was hard every day on set. Scenes were carefully set up so that he didn't have to talk or move around much. When the cameras stopped running, Kilmer would quietly leave. Kilmer did a few interviews and public appearances after the movie came out, but it was clear that he was becoming less well known. He worked on drawing and writing most of the time at home, where his kids and close friends were. Fans thought they saw a legend's successful return or a comeback, but most people didn't get the real message of that Maverick scene, which was that it wasn't a return, but a goodbye. In many ways, Kilmer's role in Maverick was a well-thought-out farewell. He ended things for the crowd, but behind the scenes, he was already leaving. His health was getting worse faster than anyone thought, and while fans were happy that Iceman was back, Kilmer quietly withdrew from public life again. Many people felt their hearts break when they saw that scene. It wasn't the whole story, though. No one who saw that movie could have thought that Kilmer's real last act would not be shown on the big screen. It would come out months after he was dead in a report that no one was ready to read: his family, fame, and loneliness, as well as his personal life. Even though Val Kilmer had a lot of fame, big box office numbers, and famous parts, he rarely talked about his personal life. People knew who he was behind the camera for decades, but they didn't know much about him. And that story got even stranger as the years went by. Like a lot of his work, Kilmer's love life was full of intense and rough times. He married the British actress Joanne Whalley in 1988 when he was at the height of his fame. They met on the set of Willow. It looked like a Hollywood fairy tale. They were young, bright, and beautiful. They had 2 children together. Jack was born in 1995 and Mercedes was born in 1991 of them. Behind the scenes, though, the stress of fame and personal problems got to them. By 1996, they were no longer married and had a secret split. Kilmer stayed close to his kids for the most part. He often talked about them as his biggest source of joy in conversations. They showed up in his documentary Val, and it was clear that after years of ups and downs in Hollywood, they had become his emotional rock. Kilmer had good relationships with his children, but his relationships with other people were rough. Over the years, he was tied to a number of famous women such as Cindy Crawford, Daryl Hannah, and even Angelina Jolie while Alexander was being filmed. Tabloids loved the stories, but Kilmer rarely acknowledged or talked about these relationships. It was clear that he kept his personal life alone. As he got older, that protection turned into something else: being alone. Kilmer's world shrunk after he was told he had cancer. Not only did his health problems make him stay away from public life, but they were also mental. His family and friends noticed that he wasn't letting them in like he used to. No one replied to the invitations. Calls were not answered. He was mostly by himself at home in Los Angeles for long periods of time, with his art, diaries, and memories close by. Some of what they said made sense. His body and mind were both worn out from the treatments for his cancer. His body was weak and his voice was a whisper. Making public events was tiring. But Kilmer seemed to be shutting down even when he was alone. In his own words, he said that he was a highly spiritual person who believed in mysteries, signs, and life's bigger purpose. But because he believed that, he was very protective of his place. His goal wasn't to get pity. He didn't want to look like a weakness. But that desire to protect came at a price. Kilmer's friends later said that it got harder to get in touch with him in the last year of his life. Messages weren't getting back to him. He stayed away from groups. People in his own family said they hadn't seen him in months before he died. From the outside, it looked like a man was living alone and getting better after being sick. But the people who knew him best were getting more and more worried. Was he really having a hard time? Did he have something to hide? Or were the years of fighting, first in Hollywood and then with his health, just too much for him? People who were close to him were saddened but not completely shocked when they heard the news of his death. They could tell things were getting worse, the rising silence and the damage to their body. That which they hadn't seen and could not have guessed was what the official report about his death would say, because under all the accolades and news stories was a truth that no one saw coming, a truth that painted a much scarier picture of Kilmer's last months. Even people who were close to Val Kilmer began to wonder how well they really knew him after the truth came out. Unsettling facts. The world mourned Val Kilmer's death and then moved on. People streamed his movies, watched his interviews again, and honored his memory as Iceman. It looked like the story was over. A well-liked star died too soon after years of health problems. Then came the paper that no one thought would get so much attention: Val Kilmer's autopsy report. When you first looked at it, it proved what everyone already knew: pneumonia problems in a body that was already weak. Details that painted a much scarier picture were tucked away further in the report. People were shocked by everything but the cause of death. In Kilmer's last few months, the coroner's report said there were signs of serious hunger. He was much lighter than what was good for someone his height and age. There were clear signs of muscle loss, which doctors said is typical in people with terminal illnesses but was unusually far along in this case. The thought made me wonder if he had stopped eating. Had he given up? That wasn't all, though. It was also said that he had several small infections that were not treated. These infections were not treated for long enough, putting extra stress on his already weak immune system. The study says that these infections would have been easy to treat if they had been found earlier. It looked like Kilmer either hadn't seen or hadn't told anyone. What was even scarier were the notes about long-term surgical cuts that hadn't fully closed, some of which were from earlier surgeries for cancer. There were signs of long-term abuse and physical stress. The report said that he had been avoiding medical care and staying at home even though it was clear he needed help in the months before he died. The toxicity results came next. The report showed that he had high amounts of prescription pain medication in his system, not enough to kill him, but enough to show that he had been living in a lot of pain that wasn't being controlled. The official story of Val Kilmer's last few months is both sad and enlightening, and it shows how complicated personal pain can be. There are times when someone hides their pain so well that not even their closest friends and family can see it. This could be out of pride or a need for privacy. These parts aren't just about avoiding sorrow or sadness. They show a deep fear of being weak, of being seen as a burden, or of not being seen as the strong, resilient person one used to be. Kilmer's case may have been affected by his need to control the story of his life and keep up a facade of independence. Even though the truth was much more fragile. He might not want to admit how much pain he was in, either to himself or to other people. This could have an emotional or psychological cause. He may be feeling this way because he is a public person and has to always look strong, capable, and in charge. It might also come from a desire to keep the people around him safe. He may have kept his family and friends from seeing how badly he was hurt, so they wouldn't have to see him in such a weak state. Many times, people want to hide their pain because they think it's too personal or too raw to share. It might even come from a fear of being judged, or the shame that comes with being weak, especially for someone who has lived their whole life in the center. It looks like a mix of these things led Kilmer to do what he did: pride, privacy, and maybe a feeling of being emotionally worn out. He may have thought that keeping his pain to himself was the only way to stay somewhat in charge of his life after years of fighting in Hollywood and with his health. In the end, this part of his story hits home for many because it shows how people sometimes bottle up their pain and choose to carry it alone, even if it means falling apart in silence. Even if someone is close to you, they can hide their problems very well. This is a powerful reminder of how important it is to check in on loved ones even if they seem fine at first glance.